All right, so I have been tasked with discussing the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, which is one of the most complex and difficult events in human history. Even the very dates by which it began and ended are in question. So I will give the basic outline of what happened at the events and then talk a bit about their implications. For me, as a Marxist-Leninist myself, all history is not simply a matter of explicating events, how they happened. It's a weapon. It's a weapon to be put in the hands of the people. And so in this case, I believe that the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution is one of the most important weapons to ever fall into the hands of the working class. However, it also must be understood, and I will do my absolute best to raise understanding about it. My actual format is in outline form, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask them as we go, and then we'll discuss afterwards. It's such a wide and difficult topic that it's, I hate to undercut my position, but it's difficult to be prepared for it because there's so many different things to talk about. I mean, I could simply talk the entire time about the status of women and their transition from basically property of men, kept at home, to leaders. At one point, possibly even the leader of, there was a chance that a woman was actually going to be the leader of China near the end of the Cultural Revolution. And so, that alone is just one minor facet in regards to gender, and that could take hours to delve into. So I will just try to give you a rough outline and the implications. To understand the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, you have to know where it came from and the background towards that. So, wow, this is a badly done outline. So in order to start with that, it's vitally important to understand both the political situation in the world and the state of the international socialist camp, and also to understand how things were in China. So, to give a brief discussion, the event leading into the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution is the Great Leap Forward. Now, the Great Leap Forward occurred in the mid-50s, and it was basically an attempt to move China from a backwards, feudal country, agricultural country, into a modern, industrialized socialist state. Now, one thing to keep in mind is there are three main things to keep in mind, which is the enthusiasm of the Great Leap Forward, the conditions, both natural and otherwise, and then the effects, the positive and negative effects of the Great Leap Forward. So, the basic idea within the Great Leap Forward was to bring individuals together through socialism in order to build a new communist society. And it was to be a great leap forward in that society was existing at one place and to move or radically leap forward to an industrialized place. So one of the key ways in doing this was through collectivized farming. Unlike the Soviets, who used coercion, whether justifiably or unjustifiably, the model for collectivization for the Chinese was to combine them farms through mass mobilization, mass campaigns, to create enthusiasm among the peasants, among the agricultural workers, among the industrial workers, for the very process of socialism. And so it was mass motivation rather than coercion that led to these collective farms. Well, these collective farms ceased to be simply collective farms of just a few families. And in the Great Leap Forward in 1958, in 1 year, 750,000 collective farms were merged into 24,000 people's communes. So that they were already collective farms. They were merged into people's communes, each which was composed of dozens of villages and had on the average 5,000 households. Now, these were not just farms. Very quickly, they put in educational facilities. They would put in minor productions, so like a blacksmith, or in this case, they tried to move towards modern industry. which is to say metallurgy, factory production, iron production, and also things like chemists. Not just chemists who gave pharmaceuticals for health, but chemists who actually created fertilizers to help with this production. So you have these massive new communal cities arising. Well, there's a problem. And the problem actually arose out of the same method that was so successful. The problem was two things. One is that the culture of China has traditionally been very hierarchical. It was based under a system for most of its existence known as Confucianism, based after Confucius, who was a Chinese philosopher and political theorist. Well, the basic idea of Confucianism is that everything has a place, that there is an order to the entire world and there is an order to all of existence. One of the famous phrases is, there is an order in heaven. And if all follow the mandate of heaven, then all will be good. Well, the problem is, because of this hierarchy, people were very bad at giving bad news to anyone above them, right? Because the person above you wasn't just someone who happened to be elected, or someone who was just a party official that had more backing than you, right? There was an order to that. And what you absolutely wanted to do is you wanted to please your superiors, and also, you wanted to do well for the revolution. Well, out of this enthusiasm, people lied about how much grain they were collecting. Now, at the lower level, this doesn't really matter, or it doesn't matter very much. If you say you have grown, 40 bushels of wheat, and you've only grown 30 bushels of wheat, the actual amount of difference isn't going to be that significant on a social scale. But what if every single household says that they've collected 40 bushels of wheat, and they've only collected 30? And that goes to the commune head, and the commune head now says that they have, 400,000 bushels of wheat instead of 300 bushels of wheat. Also exaggerates and said, well, instead of 400,000, we actually made 500,000. And then that goes to the provincial level. And every provincial level, rather than saying, oh, well, we made 500,000, says we made 100,000, or even 800,000, right? Well, that's all well and good, but then the problem is we begin to, the leadership, the party leadership says, all right, well, wow, we've had a really great harvest. We can move people off agricultural production into industrial production, because look at all this grain we have. And so what happened was just that. At every single level, everyone was falsifying, not because there was even repression. I mean, that would certainly make sense. If you didn't turn in enough grain, you'd be executed. But instead, it was just out of enthusiasm for the revolution to try and, get as much for them as possible, that at every single level, every single person exaggerated on what they were doing. Well, the effects of this, again, are quite obvious. People who were in vital agricultural industries were moved off it to industrial industries. And when the first, shortages began happening, they began removing grain from high-value areas, right, where it was over-reported, into low-value areas, which were often not really areas where there was that much of a lack of grain, but just areas that gave a more truthful report on their grain production. Again, the effects would be obvious, that you would have massive failures in the distribution of grain. Well, there was even more of a problem because there was a year, it was the 3 years of disaster, where you had massive drought and horrible weather conditions. So you combine this meteorological phenomenon of drought, and you combine that with bad grain distribution, because there's no real information about where grain is, and the effects would be obvious, which is you have famine. And Mao, who had spearheaded the Great Leap Forward, basically said, look, this is my fault. Whether or not people below were being accurate or not, it was my mass mobilization, it was my policies that were put into effect that has caused this horrible outcome. And so, of course, what happened? He was removed. And he described the Great Leap Forward as a partial failure because of these exact reasons. So this led to the rise of Deng Xiaoping and Luo Shouqi. Now, before we get into that, it's important to note that there were some very, very important successes of the Great Leap Forward, which are actually going to come very deeply into play during the Cultural Revolution. Again, you have this communalization of farms, and you have this response of the masses to mass mobilization. So Mao was already laying the groundwork for mass mobilization of the people. And they were already learning through these collective farms the methods of cooperation and socialization.